Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this Saturday's Incubate Vegas. Today, we have a wonderful guest and somebody very near and dear to StartUpNV, Maggie Salings. For those of you that don't know her, is Jeff Salings, and he'll hear this, but better other half.
First wife.
First wife, only wife. Definitely, the force behind why StartUpNV is successful. So some really cool things I've learned about Maggie today while asking her about what her background is so I can get into this. Maggie actually has a degree in air transportation and is a pilot. I did not know this about Maggie, and I've known her for a while. And then from there, Maggie got into gourmet food, and that's where she gained her interest in marketing. Later on her next career move, Maggie started teaching people how to use computers and applications. And with that, she started her own business. Maggie went on a hiatus for a little while, raised some beautiful children, supported Jeff along his journey, and came back to help him with StartUpNV. Maggie is probably one of the most involved people in StartUpNV. She is the force behind why the programs work, creating the programs, most of the funding. So very excited to have her today. And she has a lot of experience with helping startups achieve their funding goals. So thank you, Maggie.
Thank you for the kind introduction. And I am kind of a marketing guru or drill sergeant, if you will. And I think that as you start your own business, you really need to do market research because you have an idea, you want to make that into a business, but you probably have other ideas too. So understanding the scope of the market for this little fledgling business that you're going to grow and coddle and try to raise, you need to know whether it's worth your time. And so it also depends on your goals. I mean, if you are trying to take that company, grow it really fast, scale it, make it investable, then you need to have a large market. On the other hand, if you want to have a Main Street business and you want to provide for your family and you want to be able to take off and go on vacation, that is a different scope. And so you need to know what you're trying to achieve. So spending the time learning about your market is really important so that if it's not a big enough idea and you want to work on that 24 hours a day and you want to make it something that can be invested in, that can scale, that might go public, then you may need to move on to the next idea that has a market that can tolerate those types of things. Okay, so you've heard of TAM, SAM, and SOM, but what are they? You've not heard of them? Okay, in the investing world, they're just going to throw out these acronyms. So TAM is the total addressable market, and that would be like the whole world, like everything. And then there's the serviceable available market. And so these are subsets of each other. And the total addressable market, we're going to talk about Uber in a second. So they knew that their total market was in transportation. So you can do research and you can find out what is the revenue in the transportation industry. And then they took it down to taxi service because that's how they started. So that would be the service available market. But instead of being in the whole wide world, it would be in a localized area. So depending on the type of business that you're creating, if it's an internet app, you could think about the whole world, but not everybody in the whole world is going to use whatever this app does. So then you need to bring it down to an area that deals with that. And then your obtainable market, and this is where people fool themselves a lot, but your obtainable market, instead of thinking in terms of, well, if I just get 1% of that huge market, then I'm going to be a millionaire, you should be thinking in terms of, let me create a sales projection. Let me be very thoughtful about this. What's my first market? What's my second market? So we want to see at StartUpNV, we want to see a time-bound period, and we want your SOM to actually be your sales projection for that period of time. And this is not an arbitrary thing. It takes a lot of effort to get to this because when you're thinking about, okay, Las Vegas is my first market, what is it going to cost me to penetrate this market? And once I do that, what's my second market going to be? Is it going to be San Diego? Is it going to be the Bay Area? Is it going to be Texas? And so you need to do research on what it's going to cost to do the advertising that you have to do to make that market penetration. So it's not like you just can't pull these numbers out of your hat. You have to actually do research, and it's not easy. So this depiction that we have here, this is called a stacked Venn diagram. And so it actually displays pretty easily that the SAM is a subset of the TAM and the SOM is a subset of the SAM. Yes, it's working. Okay. These are some pretty famous investors, or they're with investor groups that you may have heard of, like Sequoia Capital, 500 Startups. Everybody's heard of Guy Kawasaki. And so these are the things that people, they want to see. Oh, that's not really hard. Very easy to see. That they want to see in a pitch deck. And so every single one of them wants to learn about your market. And a lot of them want to know about it pretty early on in the presentation. This one even wants to know what the market opportunity is before he knows what you're making. Okay, so he's a real investor. Okay, so they need to understand the market size, because as I said, if you want to be able to grow it, to get investors and then go public, it needs to have a huge opportunity. So, all right, what is the total addressable market? Okay, it gives context for the upside of your business, right? That's the whole potential. And it helps them to understand what you're going into. We actually don't even talk about competition, but that is something that you have to consider too. If it's a huge thing and there's a lot of competition, where do you fit in that competition scheme? Is yours something completely new? Or are you going to be stealing part of the market share that they already have? So competition and market information go together. So the service available market, this is a shorter term goal, and it gives the investor, it helps them understand what the risk is. So, you know, you're going to shoot for the moon, but here's this intermediate goal that you may be able to reach. And so it de-risks things for them if they then know that SAM is still a good sized market. And then your SOM. I like to see 3 to 5 years. Some people do it a little bit shorter. And these are just projections, and everybody knows the projections that you make, they don't survive first contact with the enemy, but then you make adjustments. All right, how do you find this information? Well, there's a lot of publicly available information from the UN, from the World Bank, from the CIA World Factbook, Google. You can find these different sources on Google. And there's external research, and that costs a lot of money. And so I don't recommend that for most people who are doing startups. Those kind of Gartner research and Forrester research, they'll be contracted by a large company that's thinking of going into a new market. And so they'll ask for a study. And if it happens to be in your area, then you may be able to get that from a research librarian, but you may not, because they do pay thousands, tens of thousands of dollars for it. Okay, you can craft things bottom up. But I have seen many decks where people have crafted their TAM, SAM, and SOM, starting with the bottom, their pricing, and the number of customers in the first market. The mistake that I've seen them make time and again is that they take 100% of each of these different groups. And so you get a very inflated TAM because you're attributing a sale to every person in the world that's in this industry. And so that's a real easy way to fool yourself. Okay, so we're going to go through some examples, some well-known examples, and then some actual examples that I've seen that are very poor, and some other examples that I've seen that are really good. So here's Uber. Uber did start in San Francisco. I recommend the streaming version of that program because it gives you a sense of what was going on at the time. And so they really did start with a 10-car service in San Francisco because you couldn't get a cab at rush hour. And so they just started providing this service for people who would sign up with them. But when they went in front of investors, so this was back in 2007, they picked TAM for transportation, but they didn't limit it to car transportation. This includes rail, it includes air, it includes ocean freight. Okay, so that's the whole world of transportation. But for their SAM, they did take it down to taxi and limousine services because that was kind of where they were. They weren't they were closer to limousine than they were to taxi, but they were attacking the taxi industry. And so when they went to investors, they gave 3 different cases: a best case scenario, a realistic case, and then a worst case scenario where they would just stay as a San Francisco-based car service. They did figure that they could get 5% of the top 5 US cities. And so this was a very logical way to approach it, very understandable to their investors. So they were thoughtful about it, and it's understandable. Their best case, they figured they could get to $1 billion in yearly revenue. Okay, so their revenue last year was $31.87 billion, and their current valuation is $62.8 billion. But they have expanded. They do other things now. Right? They're doing Uber Eats. They do the X things. They do freight. They do mobility. They have scooters too in some cities. So they've really expanded. And so they've gone beyond what they ever dreamed of, $4.2 billion. So that's a wild success story. Okay, here's Airbnb, another company everybody's heard of. And the reason it's called Airbnb is because they actually started with air mattresses. So these were a couple of kids that were living in San Francisco near the convention center, and they were hard up to make their rent. And so they thought that they would be able to inflate an air mattress, stick it in a room, and sell that to somebody, because when the conventions came to town, it was just hard to find a place to stay. So that's how they started. And they went and they did research on trip websites. So they looked to see that worldwide 1.9 billion trips were booked. And they knew that people who were going to sleep on an air mattress were probably not trying to stay at the Four Seasons. So they went for the budget market, and they figured that their trips would be 10.6 million. Now, I don't know how they got to that number. You can see here, they're dealing with trips. They're not dealing with dollars yet. And your TAM, SAM, and SOM should be in dollar figures, or yours if you're in Europe. So here they're getting to a way to figure out what their dollar figures are going to be. So they took their 10.6 million trips and they multiplied it times their average, what they think their fee is going to be. So the average fee for $70 per night stay, they stay 3 nights, they're going to make $20 on that. So they took the 20 and they multiplied it times the 10.6, and they came out to about 200 million. So, and everybody knows what they've done now. Oops, I don't have a slide that shows it. Okay, Airbnb went public in December of 2020. They started at like $68. They went all the way up to $147 that day. And they had a valuation at the end of that day over 100 billion. So things have changed. There's more competitors, but their revenue last year was 8.4 billion. And their market cap is 71.1 billion. So their market cap has actually exceeded Uber's. And they went public more recently. Okay, so what if you're going to do a double-sided marketplace? So double-sided marketplaces usually are, you are providing a platform for sellers and for buyers. Okay, so that means it's almost like a 200% sale, right? You have to find the inventory, the sellers, and you have to find the buyers, and you have to mash them up together. And for this wonderful service, you're going to take a fee in the middle. Hi. Okay, so how do you depict TAM, SAM, and SOM when you've got a double-sided marketplace? Okay, so this is how one company did it. They were doing custom clothing that you could specify online. So you could kind of design your own thing. So they took custom clothing as one of the sides of the marketplace. They took clothing manufacturing, which would be part of that as well. And then they cut it down to how much is currently being spent on clothing online. So they came up with these things so they can at least explain to an investor where they think they fit and how they got to their numbers. And so I think that when it comes to investors, one of the most important things is to be able to logically explain how you got to your numbers. Okay, and the arbitrary 1% never flies. Okay, here we have an actual example of a company that was based in New York. They were two friends who were sports fans, and they thought it would be really cool if they could lease out jerseys for a season. So being in New York, where the fans are crazy, they picked the top 5 sports, and they did some analysis on how big it was. But in order to even test their idea, they went to Yankee Stadium. So they went in with a few notions of their own, that they would rent the jersey for the whole season. It would be your favorite player. If your player got traded, you could package that up, send it back, and ask for a new favorite player. They didn't know, but they started asking, would you rent it for just one game? Because they went with the notion of going to the season ticket holders, but they just started talking to everybody in the stadium. So they actually went to a Yankees game, talked to people, and they discovered that there were people who were going to be interested in just one game because they couldn't afford season tickets. But when they went to the game, they wanted to get in the spirit, and so they wanted to have their jersey. They thought that men were going to be their most customers, but they found out that the women were just as excited about wearing a jersey. So they took all this information and they came back. So they figured out that 11 million Metro New Yorkers watch a major sports team. So they had gotten from like the 150 million people who watch sports in the US, for their starting market where they could really perfect things, they got to 11 million people. So that was their SAM. And then when they went to the stadium, they found that 11.7% of the people said, yes, sign me up right away. Okay, so they have an object now. They think that they can obtain this. So it was 1.3 million people. And they started looking into it more, half subscription and half pay per rental. So this is what they came up with. This is actually a rework of the last slide using the stacked Venn diagram, which makes it easier to understand. So 150 million Americans, 11 million in New York, and then there are people who are willing to do it, 1.3 million. But again, this is not in dollars. So now they're taking it and they are going to build it from the ground up. Okay, they're going to say, all right, what are we going to charge? So we have 1.3 million people based on our survey, and they did it a couple times. Based on our survey, 60% are going to rent it one time, and 40% are going to rent it for the season. So they can charge more for the season, and it's not inexpensive for one time, the $50, but that included shipping it to you, shipping it back, getting it cleaned. So based on this, they figured out that $50 times 60% of the people was 39 million, and 250 times the seasonal people was 130 million. So they got to 169 million in 3 years in the New York market. And then it makes it really easy to do the same sort of research if they go to Cleveland or if they go to San Francisco. Okay, they've got a formula now. So now we're on to some other examples. And you missed it when I said it's so important to do your market research so that you know what you're in for, whether it's worth your time to dedicate yourself to this business. Okay, this is an actual slide that was in a deck that I got. The total available market in the professional sports industry stands at about $73 billion. Okay, that's TAM. Could be reasonable, I don't know, I could check. The company then expects to have 7.79 billion yearly revenue in 6 years. 10% in 6 years, based on what? Okay, so it's a little bit out of context because you're not seeing the rest of the deck, but this was a company that wanted to start a whole new sport in samurai fighting. And so were they planning to develop new sports fans, or were they going to take away from the existing sports? So that it didn't cover it. So this is not a very good slide. Here's another gaming one. This one was one, I've seen this idea many, many times. It's people who were athletes when they were younger, and then they have to grow up and get a job, but they still love the sport that they played. And so they're trying to find a way to make money on it. So this was a pair of guys. One was actually a professional gamer. Okay, that's pretty rare that you're actually paid to play video games. But he was one of those. And then his other friend had been a hockey player. And so they decided that they would offer this coaching for either gamers or hockey players, and they were attacking the youth market. Okay, so what's the deal with the youth market? They don't have money, their parents do. Okay, so you're targeting a market that actually isn't the one with the dollars. So this was their slide. There were 54 million youth athletes in the United States that play hockey, and 1.8 million total gamers interested in competitive play. And that spans the age range. It's not particularly youth people. So, but this was their MVP. And they thought that they could do it with minimal code because the gamers were already online and they have tools to record their content that they could send in and be judged on and critiqued. Anyway, this was the market slide, so it didn't quite cover it. All right, now this company they had an interesting product. It was a phone case, and it was a phone case that would cool the phone. So it was a cooling phone case. So they started with the worldwide mobile phone accessory market. Okay, 224.69 billion. That's a wonderful stat. I buy that. That makes sense to me. The mobile phone protection cover market. Perfect, we're honing in on it. Okay, we're still worldwide, but now we have done it to the phone covers. And then they stopped. Okay, so we've got TAM, we got SOM. Where's SOM? What are they doing with their SOM? So they're still trying to talk about global activities here instead of starting in a market, either the US or Japan or China or wherever people buy a lot of phone accessories. That's where they should start. They also have spelling error. So please spell check your slides. So they just didn't take this far enough. So that is a poor slide. Now we have some good examples, and these good examples have sparks of greatness, but they're not complete. So this one is a fellow who had developed a traveling hair care market. So not just like women, but also men. So mobile barbers, mobile hairstylists. And he started in California. And so he does talk about hair care services, that would be TAM. And he stuck to the US, which is great. And he tells us what the total market is. So it has a high compound annual growth rate, CAGR, okay? And it goes from 69 billion to 107 billion. Okay, I'll buy that. Then he takes the TAM worldwide, 107 billion. He goes to the US, 34 billion. And then he's starting in California, which is good. It's good because, you know, people care about their appearance in California. Not that we don't here, but, you know, they're a little more involved with it there. So how does he get to this? 80 million. Okay, I'll buy that. He's got beauty salons in red, making up a large portion of the income, and the barbershops in black, and he projects it out. So there's a lot to like here. But if he can't justify how he got to this number, then the investors are going to ask him, he's like, I just picked it. So what do you do in that case? How do you go about thinking, how can I make this a reasonable and understandable market? And so I would suggest that people are very involved with their cars in California too. And there are places where you can go get your car washed, or you can have a car detailer come to you. Okay, so looking at the percentages of the people who go to a car wash versus the percentages who would have a detailer come to you, it kind of informs you on how you can go about thinking that. And then that's a logical way to explain it to an investor. So I took this percentage of the total car wash market to the car detailing market, and I applied the same percentage. Now, who knows if it's right or wrong, but at least I'm thinking about it logically. All right, now this fella had a really cool bed. It was kind of a hospital bed and it was kind of not. It was very expensive and it had gyroscopes, so it would move. So you didn't have to roll over in your bed. Your bed would move for you. And so for his competition and for his market size, he says, and I appreciate this so much, anything and everything you can sleep on. Okay, so there are a lot of people who start a business and they say, well, there's no competition. Well, there is. If you start something completely new, people are solving that problem some other way. It's the status quo. So you need to understand that. So you do have competition. It may not be beautiful and it may be an opportunity for you, but there is still competition. People are solving the problem somehow, even if it's not very well. So he included all adjustable beds, all mattresses, bed and mattresses together. So he came up with 111 billion as the bedding and furniture marketplace. And that was direct to consumer. And then he also knew that the bed that he had could be programmed so that if you were recovering from some sort of medical procedure, that you could program it to move the patient in certain ways at certain times to help with their therapy. So he also included hospital and medical beds and the tilting beds. And that market was more B2B, business to business, and that was 2 billion. So reclining chairs, I mean, I wouldn't count that. I think people who sleep in reclining chairs are not that happy about having to sleep in reclining chairs. They'd much rather sleep in a bed, but they have some respiratory issues that makes them have to be more upright. And then he included these other things too. So he very thoroughly went through all the possible marketplace. What he did in a different slide, in the next slide, is he talked about his price point and what type of buyer would be able to afford it. And so he had a realistic projection for his SOM, which was not huge. And that was the problem. Okay, this was a company that did telemedicine. But what I have an issue with here, this is like a good slide because the TAM, SAM, SOM are really large. But I am not sure whether he's talking about people, users, or if he's talking about revenue. And so I quickly looked up what the telemedicine market is in 2020. Oh, I didn't write it down. It's 83.5 billion, and I think that was in 2022, so it's post-COVID. So there were a lot of people who were not used to telemedicine, and this is probably during COVID, where people really didn't know how much it was going to grow. So now it's up to 83.5 billion in dollars. So this possibly could have been dollars. I don't know. But what I liked about it was like, it's very easy to see. It's a great slide. But this is my favorite. Look at this. There is no mistaking it. 8% of Americans are her market, and it's a $3 billion market. Okay, so this is Outlaw Soaps. This is one of the companies that we invested in as part of Angel NV 2 years ago. And she did so much market research. This is called Outlaw Soaps. And so it's a brand to live outlaw and to be a renegade. And so their fragrances are like Lust in the Dust and Whiskey Pete and Blazing Saddles. And so they're all these sort of Western theme. And so she did enough market research that she knew. And if we go on the next slide, she actually told them how she got here. So she knows that military members, REI members, Harley Davidson owners, and people who go to festivals annually. These are her people. And they make up, what's the total number? Oh, 39 million Americans, which is 8% of the population. And so that slide, so simple, so beautiful. And 3 billion, how does she get to 3 billion? Well, she explains too how she's getting to 3 billion. She's doing it with personal care, personal fragrance, and home fragrance. And so she adds up those markets down here, and she gets to 3 billion. Now, this gal used to work for Oprah, and she is a branding expert. And so everything about her company is really consistent. So she's doing okay. I mean, she was one of our investments where she already had more traction than most of our other companies that we invest in because we like the early stage startups. Okay, going to tell you what I told you. TAM is the big picture. SAM is the local picture, and it's the figure that de-risks it for investors. So they want to know there's enough room to grow. They're not sure you're going to achieve that, but at least that's kind of a target. And then you have the SOM, and for us, we want to see your sales projection for 3 to 5 years. And it should be in dollars. Now, I told you that the research can be hard, but we have some resources for you. So both the universities in Nevada are land grant institutions, and that means that they have an obligation to help the taxpayers that fund them. And one of the ways that they can do that is by helping with research and the libraries. So you should be able to get into any of the libraries in our state. Patrick Griffiths is a great guy. He's here at UNLV, and he can help you do your market research. We can too. We now have databases at our disposal, so we can help you if you need to figure out what your TAM and SAM are. Okay, you're still going to have to spend all that time on your projections to get to SOM, but we can get you going in the right direction with TAM and SAM. And then Tara up at UNR is the engineering librarian, and she also does the IP stuff. So if you need to check and see whether your product already has a competition or some other tech that's being used, she can help you figure out if there's IP in place that might prevent you from doing what you want to do. Okay, next thing is questions. Any questions?
So I hadn't heard of the TAM. It was having come from the UK.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've done it that way, but I didn't label it in the way that you have.
Okay.
So I need to change that and make it much more visible in that format.
Mm-hmm.
And then finding reports can be, and I can see for the fashion industry, for me, it's very expensive. So were you saying in those 2 contacts previously that there are things that I can get help with in terms of determining some of those figures?
Right. And I would say even just start with Google, because Google will return results that come from Statista. Now, Statista is a database that I believe both the universities and we have. It's a great resource, but the more specific you can be in your questions, the better the information that you get out will be. But the thing about Google is it will kind of tease you and it'll give you a little bit of information, but then you can take that and get a very specific question to ask Patrick, and he'll be able to help you.
My issue there then is I did mine at the beginning of the pandemic on figures that were from 2018. How are you going to look at that and say, I need to be much more up to date?
Probably, because it's like life started over again after the pandemic, and it depends on what your industry is. Now, I understand your industry is jewelry,
Clothes,
and so
actually.
it's clothes.
Just experimenting a little bit with jewelry.
Oh, okay. Well, people need clothes even when they're staying home, so there was a lot more athleisure when they were at home, but
certainly tops, I think, were more.
yeah, people walking around in their shorts and pajama bottoms because they were only on Zoom from here up. Yes. So in clothing, I would say it's probably not as affected by COVID as some other industries might be.
That's good to know. Yeah. So I'm getting ready to go to Collision in Toronto. So this is perfect timing for me in terms of what I need to take.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned when you were speaking earlier about a 7-minute presentation.
Mm-hmm.
What's the kind of, I guess you have a mini pitch, a full pitch, and then a sit down, get into the weeds pitch.
Yes, so you should have a library of pitches. I know it's really intimidating. So we had Founder University on Thursday, and Liz Goodgold talked about a 1-minute pitch. And so in a 1-minute pitch, you don't have time to talk about the market. In a 1-minute pitch, you have to hook them in. You have to get people to say, tell me more. And so the first part should be the story of why you started, or the problem or pain you were having, and how you decided to solve it for everybody. And then people should want to say, okay, tell me more about that. So I'd say a 1 minute pitch, a 3 minute pitch. Some people call an elevator pitch like 2 to 2.5 minutes, like the length of time it would be in an elevator from the bottom floor to the 60th floor. Every time you add time, you can add more information. Okay, TAM, SOM, and SOM, going into it in detail. In a 3 minute pitch, you have to glass over it. You have to at least know that it's this big of a market. And we think we can get this much, because you can say that in 15 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's the incredibly basic, but really important things that you should be able to just say without thinking.
Oh yeah, you really should know these numbers for sure. And that's the thing about pitching is you practice. The more you practice, the better you will get. And even if you don't like speaking in front of other people, you should have enough passion for your startup that it's not hard to practice that much. And you should practice with everybody. Practice in the supermarket line.
I have a really big problem with not starting with the object of the conversation, but the kind of description. So
Of the
I've described
product?
something, but I haven't actually told you
Oh, okay.
the first bit every time.
Yes, well, that is something that a lot of founders have to overcome. They fall in love with their solution, so they're spending 3 minutes on the solution in a 5 minute pitch. It's like, well, you didn't describe the pain, but now I know what your solution is. But then, like, how are you making money? Who are you selling it to? Who is your customer? How big is the market? All of those other things are things that an investor wants to know. Your neighbor may not need to know how big the market is, but definitely an investor will want to know that.
Yeah, I've got work to do.
Yeah, so 1 minute, 3 minute, I would go 7 minute and then 10 minute. And with a 10 minute pitch, you can really cover a lot of territory. And at that point, when you're doing a 10 minute pitch, you're hoping that the next meeting is an hour-long meeting where it's going to be conversational. You're doing a deeper dive on the things that you said in your 10 minute pitch where the investors want to get clarity.
Should you bring up in a 10-minute conversation any of the competitors' numbers? In other words, you're stating what your product is, why it's a great investment. You know, you did all your market research. You need to talk about any of your competitors.
Yeah, so the question is, do you in a 10-minute pitch need to talk about your competitors, and do you need to talk about their numbers? And the answer is yes, you do need to talk about your competitors, but you don't necessarily need to bring up their numbers. So you should be couching your discussion of the competitors in how you're better. Okay, so in a pitch deck, and we'll get to pitch decks eventually. In a pitch deck, you should have a competition slide right after the market slide. And I favor a rack up where we have your company and the features that you have versus the competitors. So it's in a grid and you can specify how you're better. So the thing is, when you're doing any kind of pitch, the slide should be pretty simple, which is why I love this slide. Because what could be more simple than that? You get kind of the sense of he's got a bandana. Well, he doesn't have a gun on his hip, but you know, he's looking a little outlaw. And we just have two figures here. So she can customize her narration about this slide. She can make it spicier. She can make it a little more staid. It depends on knowing who your audience is. What type of investors are these? If these are investors that all come from marketing, then she can just have a hootenanny, right? She can just say everything she wants. If these are like, you know, blue suit types of investors, she's just going to lay out the facts. Okay, so when you have a really simple slide that does convey your main points, you can customize your narration. And as you get more practice with your pitching, you'll be able to do that. But definitely in 10 minutes, I would say even in 7 minutes, you have to talk about the competition. All right, well, thank you. I'm available. I think I've got my name on a slide here somewhere. There I am. If questions come to you, you can always write to me and I will write back to you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining this Saturday session. Happy Easter.
Yes, happy Easter. So I was talking with a few people that were here beforehand, and doing a live pitch is part of what you have to do to graduate from the program. And so May 6th is the day that is set for our last day. And so doing a poll of the people in the room, they decided that they would prefer to start earlier on that Saturday and be able to listen to everybody else's pitches and do their own pitch, and even have a few investors in the room to ask questions. So that does mean if there are 20 of you, that would be several hours. We'll bring in food and drinks and stuff like that. But if you can write to me and let me know how you feel about that, then we'll make a decision on that. Pitching is not optional and it should be in person, but the length of the pitch I'm thinking now is 7 minutes, and that we will have 1 or 2 questions from investors. So that will put you in the hot seat a little bit, get you a little bit of practice in how you're going to talk to customer or investors, because you talk to customers a little bit differently, how you're going to talk to investors and how you might answer their questions. But we will get to pitching the week before that. So you will have a chance to figure out all of the stuff that you should be doing in your pitch. Plus, we have a YouTube channel that has all kinds of presentations on, well, we've got example pitches, but we also have, there's other versions of TAM, SAM, SOM on there, what should be included in a pitch decks 101 by several different people. So there's a lot of resources available to you. Plus, if you go online and say 7-minute pitch, you're going to be exhausted by the time you get through the first page. So there's plenty of resources out there. Yes, sir. I usually, to make things efficient, I usually ask for the pitches in advance and put them all into one presentation. You have to be a little bit adaptable though, because what if somebody's late and their pitch comes in this order and they're here? So it's always a good idea for you guys to always bring your pitch on a thumb drive wherever you're going to pitch, so that you have it with you and nobody else can claim, oh, well, I didn't get it, because you've always got it.
We have a question online from Shannon. She's asking if she can send over what she's come up with for review and feedback to you.
Absolutely. So on our website, we have a page that's just for pitch deck reviews. Pitch deck reviews on our website. So it's called Deck Review. So it just gives you a forum that you can attach your deck to. And then that way I don't get a ton of decks in my email. it goes into HubSpot where I can find them. And then we share them out, and usually we have 4 people write feedback. You don't know who's writing what feedback. If it's somebody complaining about TAM, SAM, SOM, it's probably me. Okay, well, thanks everybody.